The millionaire CEO watched her from afar, until one night he could no longer hide his desire. She never should have stayed this late. But the numbers wouldn't balance themselves. Janelle Carter's dark fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, her brown eyes reflecting the glow of spreadsheets that seemed to multiply like weeds. The 27th floor of Kane Technologies buzzed with the quiet hum of servers and the distant whisper of the city that never slept beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. At 27, Janelle had learned to find comfort in solitude. Her small Brooklyn apartment waited for her each night like a faithful friend, cramped but cozy, with plants she'd rescued from clearance shelves and a view of fire escapes that somehow felt more honest than the gleaming towers of Manhattan. "Still here, Carter?" The voice belonged to Trevor, one of the senior analysts who always seemed to leave precisely at 5:30, briefcase in one hand, ambition in the other. "Just finishing up the Morrison account," Janelle replied, without looking up, tucking a strand of her natural hair behind her ear. She'd stopped straightening it months ago, a small act of rebellion in a world that preferred her invisible. Trevor's footsteps faded toward the elevators, leaving her alone with the soft clicking of her keyboard and the weight of dreams that felt both close and impossibly distant. She'd come to New York 3 years ago with 2 suitcases and a heart full of determination. Atlanta had been home, safe, predictable, but safety had never been enough for Janelle. She wanted to build something, to matter, to prove that a girl from the South could make her mark in the concrete jungle. The elevator chimed softly in the distance. Janelle glanced at her phone, 9:47 p.m. The cleaning crew would arrive soon, and she'd gather her things, ride the subway back to Brooklyn, and repeat it all again tomorrow. It was a rhythm she'd grown comfortable with, even if it sometimes felt like dancing alone. She saved her work and leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment to look out at the city. Manhattan sparkled like scattered diamonds, each light representing someone else's dreams, someone else's struggles, someone else's late nights. What she didn't know, what she couldn't see from her desk on the 27th floor, was that 30 floors above, in the corner office with the best view in the building, Adrian Kane stood at his own window, looking down at the same city lights, and thinking about her. He'd been watching her for months now, though he told himself it was merely professional interest. Janelle Carter was thorough, brilliant, the kind of analyst who caught details others missed. But if he was being honest, truly honest, it wasn't her work that kept drawing his attention. It was the way she hummed softly when she thought no one was listening, the way she always held the elevator door for others, even when she was running late, the way her entire face lit up when she smiled, which wasn't often enough in his opinion. Adrian pressed his palm against the cool glass of his office window, 30 floors above her, and felt the familiar weight of wanting something he'd promised himself he could never have. The rule was simple: never get involved with employees, never blur the lines, never risk everything he'd built for the warmth of a smile or the possibility of something more. But rules, he was learning, had a way of bending when the heart decided to speak louder than the mind. Down on the 27th floor, Janelle gathered her things, unaware that her every movement was being watched by eyes that saw her as anything but invisible. As she waited for the elevator, she caught her reflection in the polished steel doors, a young black woman in a city of millions, trying to carve out her place one spreadsheet at a time. She had no idea that she'd already carved out a place in someone's heart. The elevator doors opened, and Janelle stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. As the floors ticked by, 36, 35, 34, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that something in her carefully ordered world was about to change. And 30 floors above, Adrian Kane stood in the darkness of his office, knowing that his own carefully constructed walls were already beginning to crumble. Have you ever felt someone watching you from the shadows, only to discover it was the one person who could change your entire world? What would you do if you found out your boss had been secretly captivating by you for months? The elevator stopped on the 15th floor, and Janelle's breath caught in her throat. Adrian Kane stepped inside. She'd seen him before, of course, glimpses in hallways, his silhouette through glass conference room doors, his name in company-wide emails that made her pulse quicken for reasons she couldn't explain, but never this close, never in the confined space of an elevator at nearly 10 o'clock at night, when the building felt more like a cathedral than an office. He was taller than she'd imagined. his charcoal suit perfectly tailored to broad shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of an empire. His dark hair showed traces of premature silver at the temples, and when he glanced at her, his green eyes held an intensity that made her feel exposed. Working late again, Miss Carter. The fact that he knew her name sent a shock through her system. In a company of over 2,000 employees, Adrian Kane knew who she was. Not just knew, he'd noticed her late nights, her dedication. The Morrison account needed some adjustments, she managed, proud that her voice didn't betray the way her heart was hammering against her ribs. I wanted to get it right. Something shifted in his expression. Approval, maybe, or something deeper. You always do. The elevator descended in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Janelle found herself studying his reflection in the polished steel doors, the way his jaw tensed slightly, the way his fingers drummed once against his thigh before going still. Floor 12, 11, 10. Ms. Carter, he said, his voice lower now, almost hesitant. Your analysis on the Westfield merger last month, it was exceptional. You caught discrepancies that saved us considerable exposure. Janelle blinked. She'd submitted that report through her supervisor, buried it in a stack of dozens of others. The fact that it had reached Adrian Kane, let alone been remembered by him, seemed impossible. Thank you, sir. I like puzzles, finding the pieces that don't fit. And what happens when you find those pieces? Something in his tone made her look directly at him. His eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. I figure out where they really belong. The elevator chimed softly. Ground floor. Adrian stepped aside to let her exit first, a gesture so gentle it contrasted sharply with his reputation as the untouchable CEO. As she passed him, she caught the faint scent of his cologne, something expensive and warm that made her think of autumn evenings and whispered secrets. Have a safe trip home, Ms. Carter. Thank you, Mr. Kane. She walked through the lobby on unsteady legs, past the security desk where Miguel gave her his usual wave, past the revolving doors that led to the street. It wasn't until she was halfway to the subway station that she realized she was still holding her breath. Back in the elevator, Adrian pressed the button for the 57th floor and tried to ignore the way her perfume lingered in the small space, something soft and floral that reminded him of spring mornings and possibilities he'd forbidden himself to consider. He'd broken his own rule tonight. For months he'd watched her from a distance, content to admire her brilliance from the shadows. But seeing her alone in the elevator, seeing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her work, he couldn't help himself. The elevator climbed higher, carrying him back to his penthouse office, but his mind remained 30 floors below, replaying every word of their conversation. Meanwhile, Janelle descended into the subway, the fluorescent lights harsh after the soft glow of the office building. The platform was nearly empty, just a few late commuters and a street musician packing up his guitar. As she waited for the Q train that would carry her back to Brooklyn, she replayed the encounter over and over. Adrian Kane had noticed her work, had remembered specific details, had spoken to her like she mattered. The train arrived with a screech of brakes and a rush of warm air. Janelle found a seat by the window and watched Manhattan's lights blur past. But her mind wasn't on the city. It was on green eyes and a voice that had said her name like it meant something. In her small apartment later that night, as she changed into comfortable clothes and heated up leftover takeout, Janelle couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The way Adrian Kane had looked at her, the careful attention in his voice when he asked about her work. It felt like more than professional interest. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Men like Adrian Kane didn't notice women like her. They lived in different worlds, operated by different rules. He was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, and she was just an analyst who took the subway home to Brooklyn. Still, as she fell asleep that night, Janelle found herself wondering what it would feel like to matter to someone like that. To be seen not as just another employee, but as a woman worth noticing. 30 floors above the city, Adrian Kane stood in his office looking out at the lights of Brooklyn and wondering the exact same thing. Janelle almost spilled her coffee when she saw him standing in line at Brew and Bean. It was Tuesday morning, 7:23 a.m., and she was running her usual routine. Grab a large Colombian dark roast, add a splash of oat milk, catch the 7:35 train to Manhattan. This tiny coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment had become her sanctuary, a place where she could gather her thoughts before facing another day at Kane Technologies. But there he was, Adrian Kane, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire, standing behind Mrs. Kowalski, who always ordered the same decaf with extra foam and paid with exact change counted from a little purple coin purse. He looked different here, somehow more human. His suit was still impeccable, navy blue today with a subtle pinstripe, but his hair was slightly mussed and there were faint lines around his eyes that spoke of another sleepless night. Janelle ducked behind the display of locally roasted beans, her heart hammering. What were the odds? In a city of 8 million people, what were the chances that Adrian Kane would be in her coffee shop, in her neighborhood, at the exact moment she walked in? Next, Carla, the owner's daughter who knew Janelle's order by heart, was waving her forward. But moving meant walking past him, meant risking another one of those intense conversations that left her feeling exposed and exhilarated in equal measure. She took a breath and stepped forward, keeping her eyes down. "Hey, Janelle, the usual." "Actually," a familiar voice said beside her, "make that 2. Janelle's head snapped up to find Adrian standing closer than she'd realized, close enough that she could see the tiny scar above his left eyebrow, close enough to catch that scent that had haunted her dreams. "Mr. Kane, you don't need to—" "Adrian," he corrected, pulling out his wallet. "And I insist, consider it a thank you for the excellent work on the Patterson analysis yesterday." Yesterday's Patterson analysis. She'd submitted it at 11:47 p.m., buried in a folder with 12 other reports. The fact that he'd not only read it, but remembered the details, made her stomach flutter in ways that had nothing to do with caffeine. 2 large Colombians, 1 with oat milk, Carla announced, sliding the cups across the counter. Her eyes darted between them with the kind of interest that made small neighborhoods feel even smaller. "Thank you," Janelle murmured, accepting her cup. Their fingers brushed for just a moment, his warm, surprisingly gentle for hands that commanded boardrooms and signed million-dollar deals. "Walk with me?" Adrian asked, and it wasn't really a question. They stepped out onto the sidewalk, where Brooklyn was just beginning to wake up. A jogger passed, earbuds in, followed by a woman walking 3 small dogs that seemed determined to go in different directions. Somewhere a garbage truck was making its rounds, the sounds of the city creating a familiar symphony. "You live around here," Adrian said, and it wasn't a question. "About 6 blocks away. Small 1-bedroom, but it's mine." Janelle sipped her coffee, grateful for something to do with her hands. "What about you? I wouldn't have expected to find you in Brooklyn." Something shifted in his expression, became almost vulnerable. "I have a place in Manhattan, of course, but sometimes I need to remember what real feels like." They were walking slowly, neither seeming eager to reach the subway station that would carry them back to their prescribed roles as CEO and employee. A bodega owner was setting up his produce display, arranging apples in perfect pyramids. An elderly man sat on his stoop reading a newspaper and smoking a cigarette that probably wasn't his first of the day. "This is real," Adrian said quietly, gesturing at the scene around them. "People living their lives, making their choices, building something meaningful on a smaller scale. Sometimes I forget that not everything worthwhile happens in boardrooms." Janelle studied his profile as he spoke. There was something almost wistful in his voice, a longing she hadn't expected from someone who seemed to have everything. "Do you ever miss it? The smaller scale?" He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I never had it. My father started grooming me for the company when I was 12. Private schools, business camps, internships that were more like boot camps. I learned to read profit margins before I learned to read poetry. Do you wish it had been different?" The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been for 7:30 on a Tuesday morning. Adrian's green eyes searched her face, and Janelle had the strangest feeling that her answer mattered to him in ways that went beyond polite conversation. "I used to think I didn't," he said finally, "but lately I've been wondering what I might have missed." They'd reached the subway entrance. The morning rush was building, and soon they'd descend into the underground, become part of the flow of commuters heading into Manhattan. Once they swiped their Metro cards, the spell of this unexpected encounter would be broken. "Ms. Carter," Adrian said, then caught himself. "Janelle." Hearing her name in his voice, without the formal distance of her surname, sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Thank you for the coffee, and for reminding me that there's a world beyond the 57th floor." He was already turning away when she found her voice. "Adrian?" He stopped, looked back. "Poetry isn't too late to learn." His smile was slow, genuine, and completely devastating. As Janelle descended into the subway, she realized that her carefully ordered world was shifting in ways she couldn't control. And for the first time in 3 years, that didn't scare her. It thrilled her. The email arrived at 2:47 p.m., and Janelle read it 3 times before the words sank in. "Miss Carter, please report to conference room A on the 55th floor at 4 p.m. today for a special assignment briefing. Come prepared to discuss the Morrison account in detail. Regards, Adrian Kane." Chief Executive Officer Janelle stared at her computer screen, her lunch growing cold beside her keyboard. Conference room A was legendary among the staff, the place where million-dollar deals were made and careers were either launched or destroyed. She'd never been higher than the 40th floor. "Carter, you look like you've seen a ghost," Trevor commented, peering over her cubicle wall. "Everything okay?" "Fine," she managed, closing the email. "Just got a meeting upstairs." "Upstairs? How far upstairs?" 55. Trevor's eyebrows shot up. "The executive floor, what did you do?" That was exactly what Janelle had been wondering. Had she made a mistake on one of her reports? Had someone complained about her late nights? The coffee shop encounter from yesterday felt like a dream now, too surreal to have actually happened. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. Janelle tried to focus on her spreadsheets, but her mind kept drifting to Green Eyes and the way Adrian had smiled when she mentioned poetry. At 3:45, she gathered her files on the Morrison account, checked her reflection in her phone screen, and headed for the elevator. The ride to the 55th floor felt endless. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world she'd only heard about: polished marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, with views that stretched to the horizon, and a silence that spoke of power and money. Ms. Carter, a woman with silver hair and a knowing smile, approached. "I'm Helen Winters, Mr. Kane's executive assistant. He's waiting for you in conference room A." Janelle followed Helen down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than her annual salary. Through glass walls she could see other executives in meetings, their gestures animated as they discussed deals that would reshape industries. Conference room A was breathtaking. The entire far wall was glass, offering a view of Manhattan that made her feel like she was floating above the city. A long mahogany table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by chairs that looked like they belonged in a museum, and at the head of the table sat Adrian Kane. He looked up when she entered, and that familiar intensity in his eyes made her pulse quicken. Today he wore a charcoal gray suit with a blue tie that matched his eyes almost perfectly. His hair was styled with precision, but she noticed he'd loosened his tie slightly, a small crack in his perfect facade. "Janelle, thank you for coming. Please sit." She chose a chair 3 seats down from him, close enough to be professional, but far enough to maintain some semblance of composure. The Morrison files felt heavy in her hands. "I'll be direct," Adrian said, leaning forward slightly. "The Morrison account is expanding. They want to bring us in for a complete technological overhaul of their West Coast operations. It's a $40 million contract." Janelle's eyes widened. $40 million was more money than she'd ever worked with, the kind of contract that could define a career. "The thing is," Adrian continued, "they specifically requested you." "Me?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Your analysis last month identified inefficiencies in their current system that their own IT department had missed. Morrison was so impressed that they want you to lead the assessment phase of the project." Janelle's mind reeled. Lead analyst on a $40 million contract. It was the kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime, if it came at all. "But I'm not senior level," she managed. "I don't have the experience for something this big." Adrian's expression softened, and for a moment she saw a glimpse of the vulnerable man from the coffee shop. "Experience is important, Janelle, but insight, intelligence, the ability to see what others miss, those can't be taught. You have something rare." The way he said her name, the warmth in his voice, made her chest tighten. This wasn't just about business anymore, and they both knew it. "There's one complication," Adrian continued, his voice becoming more formal. "The project requires extensive collaboration between you and the executive team. You'd be reporting directly to me." The implications hung in the air between them, working closely together, long hours, the kind of proximity that would make it impossible to ignore the tension that had been building since their first encounter in the elevator. "I understand if you'd prefer to decline," Adrian said quietly. Given the unique circumstances, Janelle looked out at the city spreading beneath them, at the world of possibilities that lay beyond the glass. She thought about her small apartment in Brooklyn, about her dreams of making something meaningful, about the way Adrian had looked at her when she mentioned poetry. "I'll do it," she said, turning back to meet his eyes. "When do we start?" Something flickered in Adrian's expression. Relief, anticipation, something that looked dangerously like hope. "Tomorrow. The Morrison team arrives at 9 a.m. for the initial presentation. You and I will need to spend this evening going over the proposal. This evening, just the two of them, in an empty office building, working side by side on the most important project of her career." "I'll be ready," Janelle said, and she meant it in more ways than one. As she gathered her files and prepared to leave, Adrian's voice stopped her at the door. "Janelle," she turned, "you earned this. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Walking back to the elevator, Janelle felt like she was floating, the biggest opportunity of her career, the chance to prove herself at the highest level, and Adrian Kane believed she deserved it. But as the elevator descended back to the 27th floor, one question echoed in her mind. What happened when professional ambition collided with feelings that were becoming impossible to ignore? Tomorrow, she would find out. The building was eerily quiet at 8:30 p.m. Janelle stepped off the elevator onto the 57th floor, her heels clicking against the marble with each nervous step. She'd changed into her best blouse, a deep emerald that brought out the warmth in her brown skin, and spent an embarrassing amount of time in the bathroom mirror, telling herself this was just work. Just work. The executive floor after hours felt different than during the day. The overhead lights were dimmed, casting long shadows through the glass walls. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan stretched out like a glittering circuit board, alive with possibility and danger. "Janelle?" Adrian's voice came from the corner office, his office. She followed the sound, her portfolio clutched against her chest like armor. She found him standing behind his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. His tie had been completely removed, and the top button of his shirt was undone. He looked less like the untouchable CEO and more like a man who'd been working too hard and thinking too much. "Thank you for staying late," he said, gesturing to a seating area near the windows where he'd set up the Morrison materials. "I ordered dinner from Marcello's. I hope you like Italian." The scent of garlic and basil filled the air, and Janelle realized she hadn't eaten since her pathetic desk salad at lunch. "You didn't need to. When did you last eat a real meal?" The question was gentle but pointed, and it reminded her uncomfortably of how well he'd been paying attention to her habits. "I eat plenty. Vending machine coffee and desk salads don't count." Adrian moved to the small table where he'd arranged the takeout containers. "Sit. We have 4 hours of work ahead of us. 4 hours. Alone. With a man who made her pulse race every time he said her name." Janelle settled into one of the leather chairs, accepting the plate he handed her. The pasta was perfect, creamy, rich, the kind of comfort food she never indulged in. As they ate, Adrian spread the Morrison materials across the coffee table between them. "The key is understanding their pain points," he said, pointing to a diagram of Morrison's current infrastructure. "They're losing money on inefficiencies they don't even know exist, like the redundancy in their data processing," Janelle added, leaning forward. "They're running 3 separate systems that should be integrated into one." "Exactly." Adrian's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Show me." For the next hour, they worked side by side, their professional masks slipping away as they lost themselves in the puzzle of Morrison's problems. Janelle found herself laughing at Adrian's dry observations about corporate bureaucracy, while he listened with complete attention as she explained complex technical solutions in terms that made sense to both of them. "You have a gift for this," Adrian said during a break, watching her reorganize the presentation materials with an efficiency that impressed even him. "Most analysts can crunch numbers. Very few can see the story the numbers are telling." "What story is this telling you?" Janelle asked, gesturing to the spread of documents. Adrian was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving from the papers to her face. "That some things are worth the risk." The air between them seemed to thicken. Janelle felt her breath catch as Adrian's eyes dropped to her lips for just a moment before meeting her gaze again. "Adrian," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly. "I know this is complicated. I know there are rules, protocols, 100 reasons why this is a bad idea." He stood up, moving to the window. The city lights reflected off the glass, creating a double image, Adrian solid and real, and his reflection ghostly and uncertain. "But I can't stop thinking about you, Janelle. The way you light up when you talk about your work, the way you see solutions where others only see problems, the way you made me want to learn poetry." Janelle's heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it across the room. "This could ruin everything. My career, your reputation." "I know." Adrian turned back to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression took her breath away. "But what if it doesn't? What if this is the beginning of something neither of us expected to find?" He moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach. "Tell me to stop, Janelle. Tell me this is just business, and I'll walk away. We'll finish the Morrison project. You'll get the recognition you deserve, and I'll go back to watching you from a distance." The choice hung between them, heavy with possibility and consequence. Janelle could feel the weight of it, the way this moment would define everything that came after. "What if I can't tell you to stop?" she whispered. Adrian's breath caught, slowly, carefully, as if she were something precious that might break. He reached up to touch her face. His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, and Janelle felt herself leaning into the warmth of his palm. "Then don't," he murmured. The kiss was inevitable, soft and tentative at first, then deeper, as Janelle's resolve crumbled completely. Adrian's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and she could taste the wine on his lips, could feel the rapid beat of his heart against her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," Janelle whispered. "I know," Adrian replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Are you ready for that?" Looking into his eyes, seeing the man behind the CEO mask, Janelle realized she'd been ready since the moment he'd stepped into that elevator. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered with endless possibility, and for the first time in her life, Janelle felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, even if it terrified her. Janelle woke up in her own bed, but everything felt different. Sunlight streamed through her Brooklyn apartment windows, illuminating the same cramped space, the same mismatched furniture, the same view of fire escapes she'd grown to love. But as she lay there, fingers touching her lips where Adrian's kiss still lingered, nothing felt the same at all. They'd worked until midnight, the Morrison presentation taking shape between stolen glances and accidental touches. Every brush of his hand against hers as they reached for the same document, every time he leaned close to point out something on her laptop screen, the air between them crackled with unspoken possibilities. But they'd kept it professional, mostly, except for that kiss, that perfect, devastating kiss that had rewritten the rules of her entire world. Janelle's phone buzzed. A text message. "Good morning. The presentation is at 9 a.m. sharp. You'll be brilliant today." Just seeing his initial made her stomach flutter. She typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on something safe. "Thank you. See you there." But as she stood under the hot spray of her shower, washing her hair with the cheap drugstore shampoo she'd been using since college, Janelle couldn't stop thinking about the way Adrian had looked at her last night, like she was the solution to a puzzle he'd been trying to solve his entire life. The subway ride to Manhattan felt endless. Every station stop, every delay, every moment between Brooklyn and the gleaming tower of Kane Technologies stretched like an eternity. By the time she reached the 27th floor, her palms were damp with nervous sweat. "Carter," Trevor's voice cut through her anxious thoughts. "Heard you're presenting to the Morrison team today. Big leagues." "Something like that," Janelle murmured, gathering her materials. "Word of advice? Don't let Kane intimidate you. Guy's brilliant, but he's got a reputation for eating junior analysts alive when they mess up. If only Trevor knew. The Adrian Kane who'd gently insisted she eat dinner, who'd confessed he'd never learned to read poetry, who'd kissed her like she was precious and fragile and worth every risk. That man was nothing like the corporate shark everyone feared." At 8:45 a.m., Janelle stepped off the elevator on the 55th floor. Helen Winters greeted her with a knowing smile that made Janelle wonder exactly how much executive assistants actually observed. Conference room A is ready, dear. Mr. Kane is already there with the Morrison team. Janelle's heart hammered as she walked down the familiar hallway. Through the glass walls she could see them, 3 executives in expensive suits, notepads at the ready, and Adrian at the head of the table looking every inch the powerful CEO. When she entered, all conversation stopped. "Gentlemen," Adrian said, rising smoothly, "I'd like you to meet Janelle Carter, our lead analyst on your account." The Morrison executives, older white men with the kind of confidence that came from decades of boardroom victories, looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. Janelle had faced this look before, the one that questioned whether a young black woman could possibly know what she was talking about. "Ms. Carter," the lead executive, a man named Harrison with silver hair and cold blue eyes, extended his hand. "We're looking forward to your insights." The pause before insights was deliberate, dismissive. But Janelle had prepared for this her entire career. She met his handshake with equal firmness and a smile that revealed nothing of the fire burning in her chest. "Mr. Harrison, thank you. I think you'll find our analysis reveals some exciting opportunities for cost savings and efficiency improvements." For the next hour, Janelle presented with the kind of precision and passion that had caught Adrian's attention in the first place. She walked them through Morrison's current infrastructure, identified the redundancies that were costing them millions, and proposed solutions that were both innovative and practical. The Morrison team's skepticism gradually transformed into genuine interest, then enthusiasm. By the time she finished, Harrison was leaning forward, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and budget projections. "This is impressive work, Ms. Carter," Harrison said finally. "When can we start?" "We can begin the assessment phase next week," Adrian interjected smoothly. "Ms. Carter will be leading the on-site evaluation." After the Morrison team left, buzzing with excitement about the project, Janelle found herself alone with Adrian in the empty conference room. The city spread out below them, but all she could focus on was the way he was looking at her. "You were incredible," he said quietly. "The way you handled Harrison's condescension, the way you turned their skepticism into enthusiasm. I've never seen anything like it." "Thank you," Janelle replied, suddenly shy under his praise. Adrian moved closer, stopping just at the edge of professional distance. "There's something we need to discuss." Janelle's stomach dropped. Here it came, the regret, the explanation of why last night had been a mistake, why it could never happen again. "The Morrison project will require us to work closely together for the next 3 months, Adrian continued. "Late nights, business trips, constant collaboration. If we're going to do this, we need to establish boundaries." "Of course," Janelle said, trying to keep the disappointment out of her voice. "Strictly professional." "That's not what I meant." Adrian's voice was soft, intimate, and when Janelle looked up, his green eyes were burning with the same intensity she'd seen the night before. "I meant we need to decide if we're willing to be honest about what's happening between us, because I can't spend the next 3 months pretending I don't want to kiss you every time you walk into a room." Janelle's breath caught. "Adrian, the Morrison contract is worth $40 million to this company. Your career is on an upward trajectory that could take you anywhere you want to go. I won't let my feelings jeopardize either of those things." He paused, vulnerability flickering across his features. "But I also won't pretend that last night didn't mean everything to me." Outside the conference room, the business world continued its relentless pace. Deals were made, careers were built and destroyed, fortunes were won and lost. But inside that glass-walled space, time seemed suspended as Janelle made the choice that would define not just her career, but her heart. "Then let's be honest," she whispered. And when Adrian smiled, really smiled, not the polished CEO version, but something real and warm and devastating, Janelle knew she was falling for a man who could give her everything she'd ever wanted, or destroy everything she'd worked to build. The corporate jet was smaller than Janelle had expected, but infinitely more luxurious than anything she'd ever experienced. Cream leather seats, polished wood accents, and windows that offered an unobstructed view of the clouds rolling beneath them as they flew toward Morrison's headquarters in Seattle. She'd never flown first class, let alone in a private jet, and the entire experience felt surreal. "Nervous?" Adrian asked from the seat across from her, his laptop balanced on the small table between them. About the presentation or about being 30,000 feet in the air in a metal tube? Janelle replied, accepting the coffee the flight attendant offered with hands that trembled slightly. Either. Both. 3 weeks had passed since their conversation in the conference room. 3 weeks of carefully maintained professionalism that fooled absolutely no one with eyes. Every morning coffee run became an exercise in restraint. Every late-night strategy session crackled with unspoken tension. Every accidental touch sent electricity through both of them. Helen Winters had started giving Janelle knowing looks. Trevor had commented more than once on how much time she was spending on the executive floor. Even the security guard, Miguel, had begun greeting her with a grin that suggested he was watching a soap opera unfold in real time. But they'd been careful. Professional. No stolen kisses in empty hallways. No lingering touches during presentations. They'd agreed to honesty, but they'd also agreed to patience. Until now. 2 days in Seattle, the same hotel, adjacent rooms with a connecting door that would either remain locked or change everything between them. Janelle, Adrian said quietly, closing his laptop, we should talk about Seattle. Her stomach fluttered. What about it? The Morrison team is expecting us to attend their corporate dinner tomorrow night. Partners only. They assume... He paused, choosing his words carefully. They assume we're together. Romantically. Janelle's coffee cup rattled against its saucer. What did you tell them? Nothing, but Harrison specifically mentioned how impressed he was that I'd found such a beautiful and brilliant partner, both personally and professionally. Adrian's jaw tightened. I didn't correct him. The implications hung between them like a charged wire. If they played along with Morrison's assumption, they'd be crossing a line from which there might be no return. If they corrected the misunderstanding, it might damage the business relationship they'd worked so hard to build. So we're trapped, Janelle said. We're presented with an opportunity, Adrian corrected. One weekend where we don't have to pretend. Where we can explore what this is without worrying about office politics or corporate policies. The plane began its descent into Seattle, and Janelle watched the city emerge from the clouds, glass and steel rising from green hills, the Space Needle piercing the grey sky like a promise of possibility. And after the weekend, she asked. Adrian's green eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. After the weekend, we decide what comes next. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel was everything Janelle had expected from a 5-star establishment. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of service that made ordinary people feel like royalty. The Morrison account had booked them into adjoining suites on the 20th floor, and as they rode the elevator up together, the silence between them felt heavy with anticipation. Dinner at 7? Adrian asked as they stopped at Janelle's door. It's a business dinner, she reminded him, though her voice lacked conviction. Is it? The question lingered as she slipped her keycard into the lock. Inside her suite, Janelle found an arrangement of white roses on the coffee table and a bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket. The card read, Welcome to Seattle. Looking forward to a productive partnership. Morrison Industries. But it was the connecting door that captured her attention. Heavy wood with an ornate brass handle, currently locked from both sides. The physical barrier between her world and Adrian's, between the woman she'd always been and the woman she was becoming. At exactly 7 o'clock, Janelle opened her door to find Adrian waiting in the hallway. He'd changed into a midnight blue suit that made his eyes look almost luminous. And when he saw her, wearing the one designer dress she owned, a black number that hugged her curves and made her feel powerful, his sharp intake of breath was audible. You look... He stopped, shook his head. Beautiful doesn't begin to cover it. The Morrison corporate dinner was held in the hotel's private dining room, 30 floors above the city with panoramic views of Elliott Bay. The Morrison executives were there with their wives, all perfectly coiffed women, who clearly belonged in this world of wealth and influence. Harrison greeted them at the door with enthusiasm. Adrian, Janelle, so glad you could make it, and might I say, you two make quite the power couple. Adrian's hand found the small of Janelle's back, a gesture that looked casual but sent warmth radiating through her entire body. Thank you, Harrison. Janelle is remarkable in every way. Throughout dinner, they played their parts perfectly. Adrian's attention was focused entirely on her, his hand occasionally covering hers on the table, his eyes lighting up when she spoke. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple completely enamored with each other. The dangerous part was how natural it felt. "So how did you two meet?" asked Mrs. Harrison, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes who seemed genuinely interested in their story. Janelle and Adrian exchanged a look, and she saw him make a decision in real time. "I noticed her work long before I noticed her," Adrian said, his voice soft with something that sounded remarkably like truth. "Janelle has this gift for seeing solutions where others only see problems. But the first time we really talked, she reminded me that there's beauty in the world beyond boardrooms and profit margins." "And when did you know?" Mrs. Harrison pressed gently. Adrian's eyes never left Janelle's face. "The moment she told me it wasn't too late to learn poetry." The table erupted in appreciative murmurs and knowing smiles, but Janelle barely heard them. She was drowning in the way Adrian was looking at her, in the realization that every word he'd spoken was true. Later, as they rode the elevator back to their floor, the silence between them vibrated with possibility. "That was," Janelle began. "Dangerous," Adrian finished. "Playing with fire." The elevator dinged softly. 20th floor. They walked down the hallway together, stopping at the space between their doors. Janelle's keycard felt heavy in her hand, and she was acutely aware of the connecting door waiting just beyond the threshold. "Adrian," she whispered. "I know," he said, his voice rough. "We agreed to take this slow, to be careful. What if I don't want to be careful anymore?" The words hung in the air between them, brave and terrifying and completely honest. Adrian's pupils dilated, and Janelle could see him fighting the same battle she was waging with her own self-control. "Janelle," he breathed, stepping closer. "If we do this, there's no going back. Everything changes." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of 5 o'clock shadow beneath her palm. Maybe it's time for everything to change. The kiss that followed was nothing like their first, soft and questioning and tentative. This kiss was fire and need and the complete surrender of pretense. Adrian's hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and Janelle melted into him with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Janelle made her choice. She slipped her keycard into the lock, opened her door, and looked back at Adrian with eyes that promised everything. "The connecting door will be unlocked," she whispered. And as she disappeared into her suite, Adrian stood in the hallway, knowing that nothing in his carefully ordered world would ever be the same again. Janelle stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her suite, Seattle glittering 20 floors below, her heart hammering against her ribs as she listened for the soft click of the connecting door. She'd changed out of her dinner dress into something simpler, a silk camisole and soft pants that made her feel both vulnerable and beautiful. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself a glass of the champagne Morrison had sent, more for something to do with her nervous energy than from any real desire to drink. The minutes stretched like hours. Had Adrian changed his mind? Had the reality of crossing this line proven too daunting, even for a man who built empires from calculated risks? Then she heard it. The quiet turn of the brass handle, the whisper of hinges that had been waiting all evening to sing. "Janelle?" His voice was soft, uncertain in a way she'd never heard before. The powerful CEO who commanded boardrooms with absolute authority was asking permission to enter her world. "I'm here," she replied, turning away from the window. Adrian stood in the doorway between their suites, and the sight of him took her breath away. He'd shed his suit jacket and tie, unbuttoned his shirt at the collar, pushed up his sleeves. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and in his eyes was a vulnerability that made her chest tighten. "I need you to be sure," he said, not moving from the threshold. "Once I cross this line, Janelle, I won't be able to pretend this is just business anymore. Won't be able to watch you from a distance and tell myself that keeping my feelings locked away is enough." Janelle set down her champagne glass and walked toward him, each step deliberate and sure. When she reached the doorway, she placed her palm flat against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her touch. "I stopped pretending weeks ago," she whispered. "The only thing I'm sure of is that I'm tired of being careful." Adrian's control, that carefully maintained composure that had made him one of the most powerful men in New York, finally cracked. His hands framed her face with a gentleness that belied the intensity burning in his green eyes. "I've wanted this," he breathed against her lips. Wanted you for so long that I'd almost convinced myself it was impossible. Nothing about this is impossible, Janelle replied, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. The kiss was different from their others, deeper, more desperate, full of months of suppressed longing finally given permission to breathe. Adrian's hands tangled in her hair, and Janelle felt herself melting into him, every nerve ending alive with the electricity of finally allowing herself to want him without reservation. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure about this? About us? Because once we cross this line—" "Stop asking me if I'm sure," Janelle interrupted, her voice husky with need. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He swept her into his arms then, carrying her toward the bedroom with a tenderness that made her heart ache. The city lights painted patterns on the walls through the sheer curtains, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the soft sounds of Seattle at night. Traffic, sirens, the hum of a city that never truly slept. But all of that faded into background noise as Adrian laid her gently on the bed, his eyes drinking in every detail of her face as if he were memorizing a masterpiece. "Oh, you're so beautiful," he murmured, tracing the curve of her cheek with his thumb. "But it's not just that. It's your mind, your spirit, the way you see possibilities where others see problems. You've changed everything for me, Janelle." "You changed everything for me, too," she whispered back, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "I used to think I was invisible, but when you look at me, I feel like I could conquer the world." "You could," Adrian said with complete conviction. "You will." What followed was tender and passionate and perfect in ways that Janelle had never imagined possible. Adrian worshipped her body with the same focused intensity he brought to everything else, but tempered with a gentleness that spoke of deep feeling rather than mere desire. Afterward, they lay entwined in the soft hotel sheets, Janelle's head on Adrian's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder as they watched the lights of Seattle twinkle beyond the windows. "What happens now?" Janelle asked quietly, voicing the question that had been hovering at the edges of her consciousness. Adrian's arms tightened around her. "Now we figure out how to make this work in the real world. It won't be easy. There will be people who question your achievements, who assume you're only successful because of our relationship." "I can handle gossip," Janelle said, though she felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of facing her colleagues, of seeing suspicion in their eyes where there had once been respect. "I know you can. You're stronger than anyone gives you credit for, including yourself sometimes." Adrian pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "But I won't let anyone diminish what you've accomplished. You earned the Morrison account. You earned your place at that table. And if anyone suggests otherwise, they'll have to answer to me." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Janelle's heart swell with an emotion she wasn't quite ready to name. "And what about the company policies, the ethics guidelines?" "I'll speak to the board on Monday," Adrian said firmly. "Full disclosure, I'll recommend that you report directly to Harrison McKenna for the duration of the Morrison project to avoid any conflicts of interest. Your work will speak for itself, as it always has." Janelle lifted her head to look at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. "You'd do that? Risk the board's disapproval?" "Janelle," Adrian said, cupping her face in his hands, "I'd risk everything for you. I already am." The weight of his words settled between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Outside, Seattle continued its nightly rhythm, but inside their private sanctuary, time seemed suspended. "I'm falling in love with you," Janelle whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Adrian's smile was slow and devastating. "Just falling. Because I've been completely gone since the moment you told me poetry wasn't too late to learn." As dawn began to creep across the Seattle skyline, painting the hotel room in soft gold and pink, Janelle knew that everything had indeed changed. The careful professional boundaries they'd maintained, the safe distance that had protected both their careers and their hearts, had been obliterated in the space of a single night. But as she lay in Adrian's arms, feeling more complete than she'd ever felt in her life, Janelle realized she wouldn't change a single moment. Some lines, once crossed, led to exactly where you were meant to be. The question now was whether the rest of the world would see it the same way. The whispers started the moment Janelle stepped off the elevator Monday morning. She felt them before she heard them, the weight of eyes tracking her movement, conversations that died the instant she passed, the kind of charged atmosphere that suggested news had traveled fast through the Kane Technologies rumor mill. Well, Trevor's voice carried a tone she'd never heard before, sharp with something that sounded dangerously like resentment. How was Seattle, Carter? I heard the Morrison presentation went very well. The emphasis on very well made Janelle's stomach clench. She'd known this would happen, had prepared herself for speculation and gossip, but the reality of facing her colleagues' suspicious stares felt worse than she'd imagined. The Morrison account is moving forward as planned, she replied evenly, settling at her desk and powering up her computer with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the anxiety churning in her chest. I'm sure it is, Trevor continued, perching on the edge of her cubicle wall with the casual arrogance of someone who thought he'd uncovered a scandal. Funny how quickly you've moved up the ranks lately, from invisible analyst to lead on a $40 million account. Must have made quite the impression on the boss. The implication hung in the air like poison, and Janelle felt every eye in the surrounding cubicles turn toward her. Sarah from accounting pretended to be absorbed in her spreadsheets while clearly listening to every word. Marcus from IT suddenly found urgent business near the printer that required his complete attention. My work speaks for itself, Janelle said quietly, but she could hear the defensive edge creeping into her voice. Does it, though? Trevor's smile was cold, calculating. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've found a pretty creative way to advance your career. Can't say I blame you. If I had what you've got, maybe I'd use it too. The words hit Janelle like a physical blow. All her worst fears crystallized into one cruel sentence. Before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension like a blade. Mr. Patterson. Trevor's face went pale as Adrian Kane appeared beside the cubicle, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone within a 50-foot radius. He was impeccably dressed, as always, but there was something in his eyes, a cold fury that made even Trevor, with all his petty arrogance, shrink back. Mr. Kane, You were just what? Adrian's voice was dangerously quiet, implying that Ms. Carter's exceptional work and well-deserved promotion were the result of something other than her considerable talent and dedication. The entire floor had gone silent now, everyone openly staring at the confrontation unfolding in the middle of the cubicle maze. Janelle felt heat creep up her neck, mortified to be at the center of such a spectacle. I didn't mean, Trevor stammered. Yes, you did. Adrian stepped closer, and despite being several inches shorter than Trevor, his presence was so commanding that the other man seemed to shrink. Let me be crystal clear, Mr. Patterson. Ms. Carter earned her position through merit, intelligence, and hard work. If I hear even a whisper suggesting otherwise, you'll find yourself having this conversation with HR, and then with the lawyers who handle our wrongful termination suits. Trevor's face had gone from pale to ashen. Yes, sir. I understand. Excellent. Adrian's gaze swept the surrounding area, taking in every face that had been watching the drama unfold. I trust everyone else understands as well. A chorus of murmured agreements rippled through the office space. Adrian gave a sharp nod, then looked directly at Janelle. Ms. Carter, I need to see you in my office immediately. We have Morrison details to discuss. It was perfectly professional, completely reasonable, but Janelle could see the concern in his eyes, the barely controlled anger on her behalf that made her heart ache with gratitude and terror in equal measure. The elevator ride to the 57th floor felt endless. Once the doors closed, Adrian's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. Are you all right? He asked, his voice gentle now, private. I'm fine, Janelle lied, staring at the numbers as they climbed higher. It's exactly what we expected. No, Adrian said firmly. It's exactly what I was afraid of, and I won't tolerate it. His office door clicked shut behind them, and suddenly they were alone in the sanctuary where this had all begun. Adrian moved to the windows, running a hand through his hair in a gesture Janelle had come to recognize as his tell when he was struggling with something. I should have handled the disclosure differently, he said. Should have found a way to protect you from this. Adrian, you can't control what people think. He turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his expression took her breath away. I can control how they treat you. I won't have anyone questioning your abilities or your integrity because of their relationship with me. And what if they're right? The words escaped before Janelle could stop them, voicing the fear that had been eating at her since Seattle. What if I only got the Morrison account because we... Stop. Adrian crossed the room in 3 quick strides, taking her hands in his. Janelle, look at me. She met his eyes, seeing her own uncertainty reflected there along with something fierce and unwavering. You impressed Morrison before they knew we existed as anything other than colleagues. You identified inefficiencies their own team had missed. You presented solutions that will save them millions. None of that happened because of your relationship with me. But people will always wonder. Let them wonder. Adrian's grip on her hands tightened. Let them talk. Let them speculate. Your work will prove them wrong every single time. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Helen Winters entered with her usual discretion, carrying a folder that looked official and ominous. Mr. Kane, the board would like to see you at 2 o'clock. They've received some concerns about potential conflicts of interest. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Of course they have. Thank you, Helen. After she left, Adrian turned back to Janelle with determination written across his features. This is it, he said. The moment of truth. I'm going to tell them everything, about us, about the Morrison account, about the steps we'll take to ensure complete transparency going forward. And if they don't approve? Janelle asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Adrian's smile was grim but resolute. Then we'll figure out what comes next. Together. As Janelle left his office and rode the elevator back down to the 27th floor, she realized that the easy part was over. Falling in love with Adrian Kane had been inevitable, natural like breathing. But living that love in the harsh light of corporate politics and public scrutiny, that would be the real test. The whispers followed her back to her desk, but now they felt different somehow. Less like judgment and more like challenge. People could question how she'd gotten here, but they couldn't question what she did with the opportunity. And as she opened her laptop and dove into the Morrison implementation timeline, Janelle made herself a promise. She would prove beyond any doubt that she belonged exactly where she was, not because of who she loved, but because of who she was. The rest, she decided, was just noise. The boardroom on the 59th floor felt like a tribunal. 12 faces stared at Adrian across the polished mahogany table, each one representing billions in investment capital and decades of corporate tradition. The late afternoon sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows that seemed to divide the room into territories of light and darkness. Adrian had faced hostile boards before, had weathered corporate storms that would have destroyed lesser men, but today felt different. Today, he wasn't just defending a business decision or a strategic pivot. Today, he was defending his heart. Adrian, began Victoria Blackstone, the board's longest-serving member and its most formidable voice, we've received some concerning reports about your involvement with a junior employee. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Adrian met each pair of eyes around the table, seeing everything from curiosity to disappointment to barely concealed disapproval. Before we continue, Adrian said, his voice calm and authoritative, I want to be completely transparent about my relationship with Janelle Carter. The room went dead silent. Outside, Manhattan hummed with its usual afternoon energy, but inside the boardroom, time seemed suspended. Janelle and I are involved romantically, Adrian continued, each word deliberate and clear. This relationship began after she was assigned to the Morrison account, based solely on her exceptional analytical work and proven track record with complex corporate restructuring projects. Board member Harrison Rothschild, a man who'd made his fortune in mergers and acquisitions, leaned forward with sharp interest. When exactly did this relationship begin, Adrian? And how can you be certain it didn't influence your professional judgment? The relationship began 3 weeks ago, but my professional admiration for Ms. Carter's work began 8 months ago, when she identified critical vulnerabilities in the Westfield merger that saved this company $12 million in potential losses. Adrian pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. These are copies of every report, analysis and recommendation Ms. Carter has submitted over the past year, each one reviewed and approved by department supervisors before it ever reached my desk. Her promotion to lead analyst on Morrison was recommended by 3 separate department heads who have no knowledge of our personal relationship. Victoria opened the folder, scanning the first few documents with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent 40 years evaluating corporate talent. Impressive credentials aside, Adrian, You must understand our concern. The optics alone— The optics, Adrian interrupted, his voice hardening, suggest that a brilliant young woman who happens to be black is only successful because of her relationship with a white male CEO. Those optics are not just wrong, Victoria. They're insulting to every qualified professional who's ever had their achievements questioned because of their race or gender. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Adrian had just called out the unspoken bias that everyone was dancing around, had forced them to confront the ugly assumptions underlying their concerns. "That's not what we're suggesting," sputtered Charles McKenna, the newest board member and, ironically, the most vocal about traditional corporate values. "Isn't it?" Adrian's gaze swept the table. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're questioning whether a woman who graduated summa cum laude from MIT, who has a track record of identifying cost savings that have improved our bottom line by over $30 million in the past year alone, could possibly be qualified for a promotion without sleeping her way to the top." The silence that followed was deafening. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, while others stared at their hands or the document spread across the table. Victoria was the first to speak, her voice carefully measured. "Adrian, no one is questioning Ms. Carter's qualifications. But relationships between executives and subordinates create liability issues, potential conflicts of interest, which is why I'm proposing immediate restructuring of reporting relationships for the duration of the Morrison project." Adrian cut in smoothly. "Janelle will report directly to Harrison McKenna in strategic development. All performance reviews and compensation decisions will be made by department heads with no input from me. Complete transparency, full documentation, third-party oversight." "And your personal relationship?" asked Margaret Chen, the board's only other woman, her tone more curious than accusatory. Adrian's expression softened for just a moment, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the CEO mask. "My personal relationship with Janelle is the most important thing that's ever happened to me. I won't apologize for it, and I won't hide it. But I also won't allow it to compromise this company's integrity or her professional reputation." The board members exchanged glances, silent communications passing between them like coded messages. Finally, Victoria spoke. "The Morrison account is worth $40 million to this company. $42 million, actually. Janelle negotiated additional consulting fees during the Seattle meetings. $42 million, Victoria corrected, with what might have been the ghost of a smile. "And the client specifically requested Ms. Carter lead the implementation?" "They did. After working with her for exactly 4 hours, Harrison Morrison told me she was the most insightful analyst he'd encountered in 20 years of business." Another long silence stretched across the room. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere far below, Adrian knew that Janelle was probably still at her desk, working on the Morrison timeline, unaware that her entire future was being decided 59 floors above her head. Victoria closed the folder and looked directly at Adrian. "Here's what's going to happen. Ms. Carter will be reassigned to strategic development effective immediately, reporting to Harrison McKenna as you suggested. All documentation regarding her promotion and the Morrison account will be reviewed by external auditors to ensure complete transparency." Adrian nodded, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Furthermore," Victoria continued, "you will both sign comprehensive disclosure agreements acknowledging your relationship and agreeing to regular HR reviews to ensure no conflicts of interest develop. Any hint of favoritism, any suggestion that personal feelings are influencing professional decisions, and this arrangement ends immediately. Understood?" "And Adrian?" Victoria's voice carried a warning that was unmistakably clear. "This company's reputation comes first, always. If your personal life becomes a liability to Kane Technologies, you'll have to choose." The ultimatum hung between them like a sword. Adrian met Victoria's gaze with steady eyes, understanding completely what she was asking. "I appreciate your candor, Victoria, and I want to be equally clear. Janelle Carter is the best analyst this company has ever seen. If you force me to choose between her professional future and my personal happiness, you'll lose us both, and Morrison Industries will follow her wherever she goes." The power play was bold, risky, the kind of move that could either secure victory or ensure mutual destruction. But Adrian had learned something important over the past few weeks. Some things were worth risking everything for. Victoria studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. Motion to approve the proposed restructuring arrangements. Seconded. All in favor? Hands rose around the table, not unanimously, but enough to give them a chance. As Adrian left the boardroom an hour later, the Manhattan skyline stretched out before him like a promise. The hardest conversation was over, but the real work was just beginning. Somewhere 59 floors below, Janelle was still at her desk, unaware that their entire future had just been negotiated and won. Tonight, he would tell her about the board meeting, about the compromises and the victories, about the fact that they now had official permission to be exactly what they'd always been. Exceptional professionals who happened to be completely, irrevocably in love. But first, he had to ask her one more question, the most important question of his life. The ring he'd been carrying in his jacket pocket for 3 days seemed to burn against his chest, a small circle of possibility that would either complete their story or begin an entirely new chapter. As the elevator descended toward the 27th floor, Adrian smiled. Some risks, he'd learned, were worth everything. 6 months later, the same coffee shop in Brooklyn felt different now, but perhaps that was because Janelle herself had changed. She sat at the corner table by the window, her laptop open to a presentation that would determine the next phase of her career. The Morrison project had been such a resounding success that 3 other Fortune 500 companies were now requesting her specifically for their technological overhauls. Harrison McKenna had hinted that a vice presidency might be in her future. At 28, she would be the youngest VP in Kane Technologies history. The usual? Carla asked, approaching with the familiar smile that had welcomed Janelle every morning for over a year. Actually, Janelle said, closing her laptop, make it 2. He should be here any minute. Carla's grin widened. The fancy suit guy. He's been coming here every Tuesday for months now. Never thought I'd see the day when someone like that would become a regular at our little place. Through the window, Janelle watched Adrian's town car pull up to the curb. Even after 6 months, the sight of him made her heart skip, especially now, when he was hers not just in stolen moments and secret glances, but openly, proudly, completely. The board's conditions had been strict but fair. Monthly HR reviews, complete transparency in all professional interactions, and an external audit of every project she touched. It had been exhausting at first, living under such scrutiny, but gradually the results spoke louder than the skepticism. The Morrison implementation had saved the client $18 million in its first quarter alone. 2 other major accounts had followed, each one cementing her reputation as something the industry press had started calling the efficiency whisperer. The whispers at Kane Technologies had eventually died down, replaced by a grudging respect that felt harder won but infinitely more valuable than easy acceptance. Trevor had been transferred to the Portland office after making one too many snide comments within earshot of Harrison McKenna. Most of her other colleagues had learned to separate her professional achievements from her personal life, especially when those achievements kept resulting in company-wide bonuses. Adrian entered the coffee shop with the quiet confidence that had first caught her attention, but there was something different about him today, an energy and anticipation that made her pulse quicken with curiosity, and something that felt dangerously like hope. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, settling into the chair across from her and accepting his coffee from Carla with a grateful nod. "You're in a good mood," Janelle observed, studying his face. "The Pemberton merger went well." "The Pemberton merger," Adrian said, his eyes twinkling with barely contained excitement, "is officially signed, sealed, and profitable. But that's not why I'm in a good mood." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Janelle's breath catch in her throat. "Adrian," she whispered. "6 months ago," he said, his voice soft but steady, "you told me it wasn't too late to learn poetry. You were right, but you taught me something even more important than poetry, Janelle. You taught me what it means to find someone worth risking everything for." The coffee shop had gone quiet around them, though Janelle was barely aware of the other customers watching with interest. Her entire world had narrowed to Adrian's green eyes and the small box in his hands. "You've proven, beyond any doubt, that you belong exactly where you are because of your brilliance, your dedication, your incredible ability to see solutions where others see only problems. You've shown the business world what I've known since the moment we met, that you're extraordinary. He opened the box, revealing a ring that took her breath away. It wasn't ostentatious or flashy, but elegant and timeless. A perfect diamond, surrounded by smaller stones that caught the morning light and threw it back in brilliant patterns. "Janelle Carter," Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life supporting your dreams, celebrating your victories, and learning from your remarkable mind?" The tears that had been threatening spilled over, and Janelle realized that her hands were shaking as she reached across the table to touch his face. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, her voice clear and sure. "Yes, of course, yes." The coffee shop erupted in applause as Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, and when he leaned across the table to kiss her, Janelle tasted happiness and possibility and the future they would build together. Later, as they walked hand in hand toward the subway that would carry them to Manhattan, and another day of proving that love and ambition could coexist beautifully, Janelle caught their reflection in a shop window, a young black woman and the man who saw her for exactly who she was, both of them glowing with the kind of happiness that came from finding not just love, but partnership in every sense of the word. "Any regrets?" Adrian asked, following her gaze to their reflection. "Only one," Janelle replied, squeezing his hand. "What's that?" She smiled, thinking of the scared young woman who had taken the subway to Brooklyn every night for 3 years, convinced she was invisible, certain that dreams like this only happened to other people, that it took us so long to find each other. As they descended into the subway station, past the musician packing up his guitar and the elderly man reading his morning paper, Janelle realized that she no longer felt invisible. She felt seen, valued, loved, not in spite of her ambition, but because of it. Some love stories, she thought as the train pulled into the station, were worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth risking everything for.